Okay, so let me invite and announce the next actually video that we will have, because our next speaker, Deepesh Patel, Partnership and Marketing Director at Trend Finance Global, unfortunately will not be able to connect with us right now, but he recorded a video for us. So please, Deepesh Patel, happy to have you at least on the video today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the attendees of the 2020 SME Banking Club CEE conference. My name is Dipash Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global and host of the podcast Trade Finance Talks. We're really proud partners of the SME Banking Club and are delighted to be media partners of the CEE SME Banking Club Conference 2020. I'd personally really like to thank Alina and her colleagues for their hard work and immense support in making this excellent and very important conference happen. As my fantastic colleagues Daniel, Jamie and Betul have alluded to in today's presentations during this SME Finance panel, I'm hoping in this short presentation to bring together some of the opportunities we have as an industry that is bringing together technologists and technology with the finance community in an unforeseen, unprecedented pandemic to bring a world of good to SME access to finance, who have probably been one of the largest losers out of the pandemic. It's an overused statistic, but not without reason. The Asian Development Bank, ADB, and ICC puts the trade finance gap alone of upwards of 1.5 trillion, and early indication and forecasts see this as rising to over 2.5 trillion by the end of next year. And beyond merely trade finance, the IFC estimates that the entire MSME finance gap lies closer to 5 trillion US dollars. But this gap isn't due to the lack of funds. It's not a liquidity problem. We've got ample liquidity in the markets. MSMEs, particularly those in developing nations, struggle to obtain financing. And it's largely due to their greater risk profile, increased complexities for international investing, and a lack of information transparency, and the fact that MSMEs often lack the formal documentation required for financing. Today, I'm talking about the current trade finance landscape when it comes to digital distributed ledger technologies and blockchain. I'll be covering the current playing field, and that includes 44 initiatives in trade, supply chain finance, credit insurance, receivables, all attempting to digitalize various elements of trade and SME access to finance, as well as some of the 19 standardization projects allowing for interoperability, which is something that's been discussed throughout the course of today's conference. We'll then take a bit of a stock check, looking at where the industry is in terms of maturity, and also the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic when it comes to acceleration of digitalization in trade. And finally, we'll be looking at what next. It's crazy to think that just 10 years ago, DLT was little more than just an idea. I think over the past 5 or so years, it's really revealed its hand, demonstrating the potential power it brings to very fragmented, antiquated industries such as trade finance. And I'm delighted to present to you our new publication, which we just launched at the start of this month, which I co-authored with Emmanuel Gan at the World Trade Organization, updating a 12-month-long study which we launched last year in Geneva with the ICC, TFG, and the WTO. And no doubt the world looks quite a lot different today than it did at the end of 2019 when we first published our periodic table of DLT and trade. Now, COVID-19 has really shaken the world, threatening the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in developed and developing economies, particularly having a devastating impact on small businesses. But it's also accelerated digitalization efforts in all sectors, including international trade, which, as we know, remains plagued by labor and paper-intensive processes that are, of course, a source of many frictions and inefficiencies. So where do we currently stand when it comes to DLT projects in trade? And this is what we're really looking at in this publication. Now, a year is an eternity in the world of technological development. And we felt it was important to see how the landscape has evolved since we published our periodic table a year ago. So I'm just going to flick on to the first slide, which is the 2019 periodic table. And from the outset, it was never designed to be static. It was very much supposed to simultaneously represent projects with striking similarities and also distinct differences. And if you look at the original periodic table, hydrogen may be similar to helium in terms of mass, but the two remain radically different when it comes to reactivity per the original periodic table. And in our periodic table, we try to draw similar comparisons and contradictions between a lot of the projects. And just because two projects might be positioned closely to one another, it doesn't necessarily mean that these projects can be considered similar across every single dimension. And another reason for selecting this design is presupposed intention to grow and morph over time. And the first periodic table of elements developed in the 1860s was purposely made with blank spaces intended one day to fill with elements that were predicted to exist but not yet known at that point in time. And this design in 2019, as you can see on the graph, represents, you know, the understanding back then, but also trying to allow for an existing and changing landscape that will emerge over time. So this was the 2019 periodic table, but I'm actually going to discuss the structure when we refer to our 2020 version of this. So this is our 2020 periodic table of projects within trade, and we've categorized our periodic table in 7 broad categories. So supply chain finance, trade finance, insurance, know your customer, shipping and logistics, supply chain, digitalization of trade documents and trade processes, as well as other projects such as marketplaces. Now, supply chain finance, in the original version, we had various supply chain finance projects which were leveraging DLT. The revised periodic table just includes an SCF category, but doesn't list specific projects. And that's because there are thousands. The increasing number of DLT SCF initiatives makes it very difficult for us to provide a comprehensive and up-to-date picture, particularly when you look at what's going on in Asia and the pace of change. You know, there was a time when we were saying 1 or 2 projects cropping up every single week. It doesn't mean that the solutions within the supply chain finance space are unimportant, quite the opposite. And DLT is very interesting within the SCF space because it addresses the myriad of challenges faced, not the least of which is greater transparency of suppliers' operations. Many SCF projects also go beyond merely supply chain finance to address other issues. So, for example, Halo Trade, which many of you may have heard of, has adopted a bit of a multifaceted approach, tackling not just supply chain finance, but also issues in relation to sustainability and covenants. Link Logis is another supply chain finance initiative which branches beyond the first tier of suppliers that supply chain finance actually looks at, and goes into deep tier supply chain financing. Now, if you just look at the graph, so on the bottom axis, you've got, you know, the core function, those core categories for the various projects. And then you've got, you know, from bottom to top, what we would rank as the stage of maturity, which I'll talk about later, with the most mature projects that we believe at the top. And for those projects which have more than one function, or what we called a secondary function, we've outlined that by the secondary color per the key legend in the top right hand side. We've also indicated the underlying technology, which we go into explain, that kind of underpins the project, the consortia, the platform, to try and kind of categorize what the minutiae and details are for those to kind of understand and have a bit of a like for like comparison for the various projects. Now, we also had a section for KYC, or Know Your Customer projects, which we included in the periodic table. And I think when it comes to SME finance, the number of projects is actually considerably greater than this. This is just for trade. Also, it's important to note that many initiatives that were categorized as the trade finance DLT initiative, so to the left of of that category in the periodic table, they also comprise a KYC element in their service suites. So we've only categorized projects here that have explicitly said that, you know, this is just for KYC powered by blockchain. And I guess it was to try and simplify the already complex visualization of the ecosystem. There are also a number of really interesting national KYC initiatives which haven't been included in the periodic table, and I can allude to initiatives such as NABU, Bahrain's blockchain national eKYC platform, which is the first national scale eKYC initiative in the EMEA region. So let's talk about maturity and the stage of and the stage of that, and also some of the key differences between the projects. We've actually increased the number of projects on this periodic table from 29, excluding supply chain finance, to 44. And some of the projects profiled in the original version have fallen aside, whilst others, the net result is many others have emerged. And a few, like Contour, which was previously known as Voltron, have progressed from being a consortium to becoming an incorporated legal entity, enabling them to provide the full commercial services that they were previously unable to provide. And I guess similar to the previous edition, each project is presented with its underlying technology, as well as an evaluation of its current stage of maturity. So the headline conclusion is most projects within this space have progressed since November 2019. We found the industry overall has made steady progress towards trade digitization, with the average project moving from a maturity stage of 2.3 out of 5 from last year to 3.3 out of 5, where 1 represents, you know, very early stage proof of concept, and 5 represents live and running or well established. And the maturity indicator has been represented by those little circles you can see in the top right hand side of each element in the periodic table. Obviously, this is just a representation of the industry as we know it today, and you know it's all subject to change. And also, there are a number of projects we're not aware of or don't have enough information to include on here. And you know, please send any interesting projects my way, and we can definitely look to including that in next year's version. It's also important to note that, like the previous version, we've primarily focused on the digitalization side of DLT in trade, examining how it can be used in pursuit of the digitalization of trade documentation, trade processes, and the exchange of trade data. So we haven't covered, for example, track and trace projects, of which there are thousands, i.e., you know, tracking and tracing the movement of PPE cross-border, which is a very important and very topical project that's going on, and there are thousands like that, but we've had to kind of restrict it to the specific trade finance sector. An important observation that we also made is that customs development is trailing, and trade digitalization really relies on the development of some of these end-to-end solutions, and any digital process will only be as strong as its least digitized link. And for international trade, this means integrating customs, which is no easy task. And several governments are testing or considering using DLT for their customs operations and single windows. Most projects obviously remain in a bit of a conceptual or piloting phase. There are some projects, there's Cadena in Latin America, which we know of. it serves the very specific purpose of mutual recognition of authorized economic operators. We also flag in the publication a handful of proof of concept and pilot projects involving customs, such as the NAFTA CAFTA proof of concept run by US Customs and Border Protection Office, the EU DG Taxed ATA proof of concept, which was conducted with the International Chamber of Commerce. There's the Korean Export Clearance Project, and also Shanghai's Single Window Project. But many of these projects have only made very limited progress, and we haven't really been able to quantitatively evaluate those due to a bit of a lack of data, which is why we haven't featured them in the revised periodic table. But customs are incredibly important, and these development projects are important. Trade Lens is another project which is integrating with a lot of customs authorities, and there are several other DLT, digitization of trade document projects that are looking at integrating with customs, such as Avanza Innovations, which has been integrated into Dubai customs. But it's not enough. More needs to be done. We need to start seeing more movement along this front. And as noted, a digitalized trade process is only as strong as its least digitalized link, and that's why we thought it was very important to flag this up. A new section on standardization initiatives was also added in this year's publication, and I think it's very important to understand there are different types of standardization, and there are lots of different projects which aim towards creating digital standards, which are very relevant for trade to drive digital interoperability. For example, how does R3 Corda interoperate with Hyperledger Fabric as an example? And these initiatives play a really crucial role in shaping the future of trade digitalization, and it can only really happen in an ecosystem that allows for those seamless exchanges of data between existing platforms, and this requires developing and implementing globally accepted digital standards for trade. I guess in the broader trade area, there are several initiatives all working towards creating this set of standards. Some of these are focused on particular sectors or geographies, others are perhaps a bit more general, and some are spearheaded by large international organizations like UN CIFACT, others by private companies. And the graph you see on the screen provides a bit of a glance look at some of the key initiatives in the space. And I guess last but not least, the study also showcases the results of the supplementary survey that we conducted analyzing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the projects featured, and how digitalization projects within MSME access to finance and trade finance have been impacted by the pandemic. And to gain this understanding, we conducted this survey and we featured it in the publication, and we asked respondents how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted their DLT plans and activities. And in accordance with other studies, in particular the ICC Global Survey on Trade Finance, we find that the vast majority of firms have actually experienced a positive benefit to their DLT plans and activities as a result of the pandemic. And I think that's been a theme throughout today's conference. Without the physical presence of staff and forcing people to work from home in many regions around the world, banks and corporates have really been forced to produce rapid digital solutions in order to remain operational, both by temporary and also fairly permanent solutions. And in many instances, this was actually just done by scaling up existing digital solutions or enrolling projects to other economies that perhaps the larger banks operate in. And whilst many DLT solutions may not have been directly implemented as a result of COVID-19, we can't not talk about the progress made in the implementations of all of the supporting technologies and that halo effect, which has clearly had very positive implications. But actually, I think the challenges are probably one of the most important parts and the takeaway here, because it's important to understand why are we not fully digital yet within the industry? And we tried to seek the various challenges faced by DLT firms. And it's interesting to note from this graph that legal challenges were rated as posing a more pressing challenge rather than, as opposed to any of the other challenges. And it really does suggest that the largest current challenge facing the deployment of DLT solutions across the entire industry relates to that lack of legal clarity and enabling the regulatory framework that firms face. I think if the industry is to transition successfully into a fully digitalized world powered in part by DLT, but also in part by lots of other technologies, this regulatory development needs to keep pace with technological advancement, and governmental authorities and regulators need to keep pace with the technological advancement and actually address the historic and often wildly outdated laws that are burdening those that seeking to guide and bring the industry into the future. So look, thank you very much for having me at the CE SME Banking Finance Conference 2020. I invite you to send through any messages or send across an email with any questions. Be delighted to have this further. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.